So the U.S. national debt is at nearly $26 trillion, I've heard you say. What does that mean to people? Like, is there any way you can kind of give people a comparison as far as why that is potentially a dangerous number?
Well, first of all, it's the tip of the iceberg because that is only the Treasury debt that's outstanding. So that's bonded, funded debt, where the government has borrowed money and issued a formal IOU in the form of a Treasury security. But those are not the only debts that the U.S. government is obligated to repay, right? If you look at all of the debt that we're on the hook for, right, the unfunded liabilities, which would include commitments to pay Social Security benefits, Medicare benefits, pensions to government retirees. And then if you look at a lot of debt that the U.S. government has guaranteed, such as student loans or mortgages or things like that, and you try to ascribe some type of liability for that, because we know that some of the debts are going to go bad and the government is going to be on the hook based on its prior commitments. So if you actually take a fair accounting of the unfunded liabilities, there you're talking about like $150 trillion. So you're talking about a number that is more than 5 times greater than the official national debt that we're talking about when you're talking about this $26 trillion. But to put that $26 trillion in perspective, that's about 8 years of the current tax revenue, right? That's 8 years of taxation to repay that debt, which obviously shows you that the debt is completely unrepayable. There's no way to do that because that's 8 years of tax revenue where the government spends nothing on anything else, which is impossible. The government can't spend zero in order to repay its debt. If you look at it as a percentage of GDP, right now we're at about 120% of GDP, the size of that debt. But of course, American taxpayers are also on the hook for the debts of the state and local governments. So when you add on those debts, I think the total claim on GDP by government on all levels is more like, I think, about 140%, but it's escalating quickly. In fact, right now, the U.S. government is borrowing more money than it raises in taxes. I think almost 52 cents of every federal dollar spent has been borrowed. I mean, think about that for a minute. This is how the U.S. government is running itself, not on taxation, but on debt. And of course, the Federal Reserve is buying probably all of that debt. So the government is already running itself with a printing press rather than through legitimate taxation. The only reason that we appear solvent is because the average cost to fund the national debt, the interest is 1.5%. And so because we're only paying 1.5% interest on 26 trillion of debt, it looks like the debt is affordable. But if interest rates were to ever normalize, I mean, forget about interest rates being high. Remember in 1980, they went to 20%. But, you know, even if they went to 5% today, you know, you would be looking at spending more in interest than we do in Social Security. In fact, we'd be spending more on interest than Medicare. It'd be the biggest line item in the budget. And in fact, if interest rates went to about 5%, about 40% of every tax dollar would go to interest on the national debt. Think about that. The government collects $1 in taxes. 40 cents of that dollar would go just to paying interest on the debt that we have. I mean, they wouldn't be paying off any of the principal, just servicing the interest. And of course, if interest rates went to something like 10%, then the government would have to spend more in interest than it collects in taxes, which obviously is impossible. But the U.S. government is insolvent. And if we ever had a spike in interest rates, we would have to default on the debt. And if we didn't default, we'd have massive or hyperinflation. So we have gone beyond the point of no return. The key is, when is the world going to wake up to the reality of American insolvency and stop loaning America additional money?